There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. A Tuesday evening, the sound of rain against the window pane, a half-empty mug of tea growing cold on the coffee table. You only recognize them as foundations, as load-bearing walls in the architecture of your memory. Much later, when you feel the whole structure of your world shift on top of them. For me, that shift felt like a quiet, creeping demolition that began with a single sentence, spoken in the dim hallway of his apartment, a space that had suddenly become a chasm between us. He said he missed the old me, and in the hollow silence that followed, all I could think to do was take him back, word by word, to the night the old me ceased to exist, the night everything, absolutely everything, changed. I had known Sam for 7 years, since the last semester of college when we were randomly assigned as partners for a brutal advanced physics project. He was the effortless star of the engineering department, gregarious, confident, with a laugh that could fill a lecture hall and an easy charm that seemed to draw people into his orbit like planets around a sun. I was not. I was a photography student, more comfortable in the silent, chemical-scented dark of the development room, more fluent in the language of light and shadow than in casual conversation. Our friendship was, by all accounts, an anomaly. It was a strange and wonderful piece of orbital mechanics that made no sense on paper but worked perfectly in practice. He pulled me out of my shell, and I think, gave him a quiet place to land. For 7 years, this dynamic held. He navigated the loud, bright world of corporate consulting, chasing promotions and dating a succession of bright, beautiful women who all seemed to be named Chloe or Jessica. I built a quiet life for myself, shooting local campaigns, portraits, and spending my free time documenting the subtle decay of industrial buildings, finding beauty in the forgotten and the overlooked. And through it all, I harbored a secret that felt like a permanent darkroom inside my own chest, a place where a single, overexposed image of him was perpetually developing, threatening to burn through the paper. I was in love with him. It was a hopeless, silent, and deeply patient kind of love, one I had long ago accepted would exist only in the abstract, a foundational assumption of my life that I never dared to test. Our friendship was too precious, a perfectly balanced ecosystem I wouldn't risk for anything. It was a fortress built on unspoken rules. We could talk for hours about anything: his job stress, my artistic frustrations, politics, bad movies, but the emotional core of our own lives remained a carefully guarded territory. We never spoke of loneliness. We never spoke of fear. And we certainly never spoke of the profound, aching affection I felt for him, an affection I was certain was entirely one-sided. I was the stoic observer, the keeper of his stories, the safe harbor. That was my role, and I played it so well that even I sometimes forgot it was a performance. I had constructed the old me he would later claim to miss, a version of myself that was steady, uncomplicated, and, above all, safe. The first hairline crack in that fortress appeared not with a bang, but with the slow, grinding pressure of exhaustion. Sam's job, always demanding, had become a monster, devouring his weeks in a blur of cross-country flights, sterile hotel rooms, and high-stakes presentations. He was traveling constantly, living out of a suitcase, and the bright energy that had always defined him began to fray at the edges. Then came the breakup. The final Chloe, the one everyone thought might stick, ended it. He told me about it over the phone, his voice flat and distant, as if reporting on a logistical failure in a project plan. He didn't sound heartbroken. He just sounded empty, hollowed out. That was the shift. It was the catalyst that began to dissolve the carefully mixed concrete of our platonic boundaries. He stopped talking about dating. He stopped going out with his usual crowd. Instead, he started appearing at my door, usually late on a Friday night, looking like a ship that had been battered by a relentless storm. He'd have his laptop bag slung over one shoulder and a deep, weary exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes. He wouldn't call first. He would just appear, a silent testament to his own unraveling, knowing I would let him in. He needed a place to land, and my quiet apartment, with its overflowing bookshelves and the faint, ever-present smell of fixer, had become his only port. Thus began the ritual. It was a ceremony of unspoken need, and it always unfolded in the same way. He would drop his bag by the door, shed his shoes, and collapse onto my worn leather couch as if his strings had been cut. I would make him tea, which he rarely drank, and put on some ambient documentary about deep-sea life or the formation of glaciers, something with a calm, authoritative narrator and no emotional stakes. We wouldn't talk much. The silence in my apartment was different from the silence in his. Mine was a chosen, comfortable quiet. His, I suspected, was a lonely, echoing one. So he came to borrow mine. The first time he fell asleep on me, it felt like a tectonic event. We were sitting side by side, watching penguins navigate a treacherous ice floe, when his head, which had been slowly listing for 10 minutes, finally came to rest on my shoulder. My entire body went rigid. I stopped breathing. I could feel the surprising weight of his skull, the soft tickle of his hair against my neck, the warmth of him seeping through my shirt. Every nerve ending in my body was screaming. It was a catalog of overwhelming sensory data, the faint scent of his shampoo, the gentle rhythm of his breathing as it deepened into sleep, the sheer, undeniable fact of his proximity. My mind, the quiet observer, went into overdrive, analyzing, cataloging, panicking. This was a mistake, a miscalculation. He was just tired, I told myself, a mantra against the frantic tide of hope rising in my chest. This meant nothing. It was an accident of gravity and exhaustion. I sat there for nearly 2 hours, my arm going numb, my heart hammering against my ribs a frantic, terrified beat. I was a statue of feigned nonchalance, terrified that if I moved, if I even breathed too deeply, I would shatter the illusion of platonic ease and expose the desperate, yearning truth of my feelings. When he finally stirred, he blinked slowly, lifted his head, and mumbled an apology without meeting my eyes before gathering his things and disappearing into the night, leaving me utterly wrecked and vibrating with the ghost of his touch. But it wasn't a one-time accident. It became the centerpiece of our new ritual. Every week or two, he would appear at my door, and every time, we would end up on the couch, and every time, he would fall asleep against me. It was a strange, silent negotiation. He would never acknowledge it the next day, and I would never mention it. We existed in a state of deliberate amnesia, allowing these moments of intense, ambiguous intimacy to happen in a vacuum, disconnected from the established narrative of our friendship. It was a space governed by plausible deniability. He was just exhausted. I was just being a good friend. Any other interpretation was a fantasy of my own making. Yet, I couldn't stop myself from interpreting. Each time it happened, my internal monologue was a torrent of analysis. I was a detective searching for clues in the most minute gestures. The way his hand would sometimes rest on the cushion between us, his fingers just a centimeter from my own. The way he would sigh in his sleep, a sound of such profound release it felt like a confession. I was living in a state of suspended animation, caught between the sheer, agonizing bliss of having him close and the terror of what it all meant. My apartment, once my sanctuary, had become a laboratory for the study of unspoken things. The couch was our shared vessel, adrift on a sea of ambiguity, and every night he was there, I felt like I was drowning in the hope that this time, the current would finally pull us to a shore I could understand. I began to see our friendship through the lens of my work. It was like a photograph that refused to properly develop. There was an image there, something beautiful and clear, but it was trapped in the emulsion, resisting the chemicals, refusing to resolve. Was this a portrait of profound friendship, or was it a love story I was projecting onto the paper myself? I was so afraid of forcing the development, of exposing it to too much light and burning it out completely, leaving me with nothing but a black, ruined sheet. So I waited in the dim, red safety light of our unspoken arrangement, waiting for the image to emerge on its own terms. The ritual escalated, as rituals often do. One night, a thunderstorm broke over the city, a violent, percussive downpour that seemed to shake the very foundations of my building. Sam was already asleep, a dead weight against my side, and the thought of waking him, of sending him out into that maelstrom, felt physically cruel. It was past 2 a.m. I had long ago surrendered to the numbness in my arm and the quiet ache in my heart. So I let him sleep. I eventually drifted off myself, my head awkwardly angled against the back of the couch. I woke just before dawn to a world washed in gray light and silence. The storm had passed, but something was different. In the night, we had shifted. I was no longer propped upright. I was lying down, my head on a cushion. And Sam was lying next to me, facing me, his arm thrown over my waist, his face just inches from mine. His eyes were closed, his breathing even and deep. He had moved in his sleep, seeking comfort, and had anchored himself to me. This was no longer an accident of gravity. This was an act of unconscious, undeniable seeking. My heart didn't hammer this time. It did something far stranger. It settled. A profound, terrifying calm washed over me. The detective in my head finally went silent. The analyst retired. There was no more evidence to collect, no more clues to decipher. The image had finally resolved in the developing tray, stark and clear and undeniable. This was not friendship. Not anymore. I didn't know what it was, but I knew what it wasn't. I lay there, trapped not by fear but by a fragile, breathtaking certainty, and I watched him sleep until the sun rose. He woke slowly, his lashes fluttering before his eyes opened. They were a hazy, sleep-softened blue, and for a long moment, they just looked at me, unfocused. There was no surprise in them, no panic, just a slow, quiet dawn of awareness. His gaze drifted down to his arm, draped over my stomach, and then back to my face. The air in the room grew thick, heavy with everything we had spent years not saying. My entire life seemed to contract into that single moment, into the few inches of space between our faces. The silence wasn't empty. It was full, charged with 7 years of history and a future that was about to be written, for better or for worse. He drew a breath, as if to speak, but no words came. He just watched me, his expression unreadable but intensely present. And in that moment, I realized the decision was mine. I could break the spell. I could make a joke, untangle myself, and pretend this was just another layer of our deniable ritual. I could retreat to the safety of the old me, the friend, the harbor. Or I could stay. I could hold his gaze. I could accept the terrifying, beautiful truth that was lying between us. I stayed. His eyes searched mine, and I saw a flicker of something I'd never seen before. Not confidence, not easy charm, but a raw, aching vulnerability. He looked frightened and hopeful. He swallowed, and when he finally spoke, his voice was a barely audible whisper, a fragile thing in the quiet room. Leo, I could only manage a nod. Another beat of silence. His gaze dropped to my lips, then returned to my eyes. Would it be okay? He whispered. It wasn't a question about a single action. It was a question about everything. About crossing the line. About demolishing the fortress. About ruining the perfect, stable friendship for the chance at something unknown. It was the most terrifying and beautiful question I had ever heard. And I whispered back the only honest answer I had. Yes. The kiss was not what I had imagined in my years of silent longing. It wasn't passionate or desperate. It was tentative. It was hesitant. It was a question asked again, but this time without words. His lips were soft, uncertain, and it was a kiss of such profound, heart-stopping tenderness that it felt less like a physical act and more like the yielding of a soul. It was a confession. It was a surrender. And when he pulled back, the inch of space between us was no longer a chasm. It was a shared atmosphere. We had finally, irrevocably, crossed over. And then he panicked. The vulnerability in his eyes curdled into pure, wide-eyed fear. He scrambled back, untangling himself from me as if he'd been burned. He sat up, running a hand through his hair, his back to me. The intimate atmosphere shattered, replaced by the jagged shards of his sudden terror. He wouldn't look at me. He just stood up, grabbed his keys from the bowl by the door, and muttered something that sounded like, "I have to go," before pulling the door shut behind him with a soft, final click. The silence he left behind was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was a roaring, deafening void where, just moments before, there had been a fragile, budding universe. I lay there on the couch, the phantom feeling of his lips on mine, the ghost of his weight beside me, and I felt the cold certainty of utter devastation wash over me. I had misinterpreted everything. I had taken his exhaustion, his loneliness, his need for simple human comfort, and I had twisted it into a narrative that suited my own desperate heart. He hadn't been crossing a line. He had just stumbled over it in the dark, and the moment he saw it in the light of day, he had recoiled in horror. I had burned the photograph. I had ruined everything. The days that followed were a special kind of hell. He didn't answer my texts. My calls went straight to voicemail. The ritual was broken, our connection severed. I saw him once, from across the street, laughing with some mutual friends outside a coffee shop. He looked fine. He looked normal. He looked like the old Sam. The sight was a physical blow, confirming my worst fear, that our late-night sanctuary had been nothing more than a temporary coping mechanism for him, a refuge he had now abandoned, leaving me alone in the ruins. The pain was a dull, constant pressure behind my ribs, the weight of a loss so profound it felt like a part of my own body had been amputated. After a week of this agonizing silence, I couldn't take it anymore. The quiet observer had to become the actor. I drove to his apartment, my hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I needed to hear it from him directly. I needed the final, brutal confirmation so that I could begin the long, impossible process of grieving our friendship and moving on. I found him just as he was getting home, fumbling with his keys at his front door. He froze when he saw me, like a deer caught in headlights. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by a guarded, anxious energy. He let me in without a word. His apartment was immaculate, sterile, the polar opposite of mine. It felt like a hotel room he happened to live in. We stood in his hallway, the air thick with unspoken apologies and accusations. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at a spot on the wall over my shoulder. Finally, he spoke, his voice strained. "Leo, I'm so sorry. I don't know." "You don't know?" I asked, and the quiet patience I had cultivated for 7 years finally snapped. "Or you don't want to know?" "Sam, what was that? What have we been doing for the last 3 months?" He shook his head, a gesture of pure, frustrated confusion. "I don't know what you mean. Things just got weird. Complicated." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were full of a desperate plea for retreat, for a return to the safety of the past. "I just miss how things were," he said, his voice cracking. "I miss the old US. I miss the old me." And there it was, the sentence that struck me like a physical blow. He missed the version of me that asked for nothing. The version that was a safe, inanimate object of comfort. The version that kept his own heart under lock and key. A bitter, hot anger rose in my throat, but beneath it was a deep, seismic wave of sadness. I looked at him, at this man I loved, this man who was so terrified of the truth that he was willing to wound us both just to avoid it. I took a deep breath, and the anger receded, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. This was the final moment. I could either accept his retreat and let our story end here, in this sterile hallway, or I could show him exactly what he was asking to have back. "The old you," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "The one who lived out of a suitcase and called me from lonely hotel rooms, sounding like a ghost? The one who was so wrung out he couldn't even make it home? Is that the you that you miss?" I took a step closer, closing the distance he had tried to create between us. "And the old me? You miss the old me?" I let the question hang in the air, heavy and sharp. "Let me tell you about the old me, Sam. The old me sat on that couch every single time you showed up, his heart breaking, and pretended it was nothing. The old me went to bed every night for 7 years in love with his straight best friend, a secret he thought he would take to his grave. The old me sat there while you slept on his shoulder and felt a kind of happiness so painful it was almost unbearable. He was patient. He was quiet. He was a fortress of unspoken feelings. He was slowly, quietly, dying inside. His face crumbled. The defensive anger, the confusion, it all dissolved, leaving behind the same raw vulnerability I had seen just before he kissed me. "Is that the me you miss?" I asked again, my voice softer now. "The one who was hiding?" "Because he's gone. He left the moment you asked if it was okay. You can't have him back. Because he was never real to begin with. He was just a photograph I was afraid to develop." Tears welled in his eyes, and he finally broke. A sob escaped him, a choked, ragged sound. "I don't know what I'm doing, Leo," he whispered, his voice thick with shame. "I was so lonely. And coming to your place, it was the only time I felt safe. It was the only time I wasn't pretending. And when I kissed you, it was the most honest thing I've done in years. And it terrified me. Because I liked it. And I don't know what that means." The confession hung between us, fragile and new. He wasn't rejecting me. He was terrified of accepting himself. All the confusion, all the loneliness he'd been running from, had coalesced into this one honest moment, and the implications had sent him fleeing. Seeing him so completely undone, all my hurt and anger vanished, replaced by a wave of overwhelming, protective tenderness. I closed the final few inches between us and wrapped my arms around him. He collapsed against me, his body shaking with silent sobs, and for the first time, it wasn't him seeking unconscious comfort from me, but me consciously, deliberately, holding him together. We didn't fix everything in that hallway. There were more conversations, more hesitant questions, more fears laid bare in the quiet of my apartment. But that was the true beginning. Not the first kiss, but the first honest confession. It was the moment we stopped retreating into the past and started the slow, careful work of building a future. We learned to replace the safety of plausible deniability with the far more profound safety of vulnerability. We dismantled the old fortress, stone by stone, and used them to build a new foundation, one based not on unspoken rules, but on spoken truths. Now, when he comes to my apartment, he doesn't collapse on the couch from exhaustion. He walks in, puts his arms around me, and kisses me, a greeting as natural as breathing. We still watch documentaries about the deep sea, but now his hand is laced through mine, an easy, intentional weight. Sometimes, I still find him watching me with that old, searching look in his eyes, but the fear is gone, replaced by a quiet wonder. He is no longer an unknowing initiator, and I am no longer just a quiet observer. We are simply two people who found their way out of the dark, not by switching on a floodlight, but by learning to see in the gentle, honest twilight we had created together. The old us is gone, and what's left is infinitely better. It's real,